Amazing. Thank you. Let's move on to the next session, which is one and only Amber. Now, Amber will be coming in and sharing some practical realities of what to expect when FINTRAC comes knocking your door, how to prepare, and maybe how to survive with your sanity intact. So, Amber, everyone.
Okay. Sorry, where is the, right here.
Okay.
Perfect. So I'm Amber Scott. I'm the chairperson and co-founder of Outlier Compliance Group. I'm going to start off just with a couple of quick disclaimers. I am a compliance consultant. I don't represent any government or government agency, so I'm going to be talking about FINTRAC. But if FINTRAC has something different to say than what I'm saying, they're right, I'm wrong, mea culpa. I'm not a lawyer. This isn't legal advice, and I'm going to be doing a speed run through the FINTRAC assessment activities that I know about at this point. These are not the only tools in FINTRAC's toolbox. There's been a lot of big changes in the last year, and so I want to make sure that everyone is on the same page about those, that you understand what types of things might be making their way into your inbox. But certainly if you're seeing other things, then that's entirely possible. And you'll understand why as we go through this presentation. But there's a number of different types of legitimate requests that FINTRAC can make. And some of them look very different from what we've seen historically, to the point that we've had MSBs actually ask questions about, is this a real request from the regulator? Because it is so characteristically different than things that we've seen previously. And last up, I'm really sorry about the wall of text format on a lot of these slides. They're really weighty, but I also wanted you to have things that you can take away and share with your teams. So this is just the assessment page from FINTRAC's website. It talks about the different types of things that they do, which include examinations, monitoring, both of which involve them interacting directly with you, the validation of your data that's happening in the background, observation letters, and compliance assessment reports. So these are some of the different tools that exist. In terms of what we've seen so far in 2025, we've seen certainly different variants of these tools come out in the MSB space. And I want to start with information requests, because I think this is one of the things that has created some of the most friction in recent requests. So the wall of text up on the screen right now is just from the Proceeds of Crime, Money Laundering, and Terrorist Financing Act. And this talks about what FINTRAC has the right to do. So they have a right to examine your records. They have a right to enter your premises. They have a right to cause a record to be reproduced, which means they can take copies of things digitally or otherwise. They have the right to examine your computer system, use your copying equipment, if you're thinking about those paper records that some of us still have. And you're expected when this happens to give FINTRAC's personnel reasonable assistance. And so usually when FINTRAC wants something like this, they do give us notice. Usually when they're entering our premises, it's going to be in the context of an examination. Not necessarily always, but usually. They can also demand information from us. And so this is a different subsection where they can serve us a notice. They can ask us for information. And here again, we're expected to answer this notice. So if we have the information, we're expected to provide it. If we don't have the information, we're expected to let FINTRAC know that we don't have the information. Not responding on any of these requests is probably not the right course of action. This is a real example. So this went out to dealers in virtual currency. Originally, it was something that was very concentrated, at least in the folks that reached out to us in the Bitcoin ATM space. And then we saw this type of request happen with exchanges more broadly. And so this was an email that was received. The subject line was that it was a request for wallet addresses. It came from the FINTRAC MSB registration website. And I have, or email address rather, and I have the email address highlighted because This is one of the requests that raised a lot of questions from the folks that received it about whether or not it was a legitimate request from the regulator, because it did look so different from everything that we saw previously. So one of the first things that I always look at when I see a request and someone's questioning the legitimacy is, where did it come from? Anything that FINTRAC sends you by email is going to come from one of these, at fintrac-canaf.gc.ca email addresses. So your first port of call when you get a request and you're saying, is this potentially a scam? And if it's not, it's time sensitive, how do I deal with it? Is really to look at that underlying email address. So FINTRAC then goes on to say that they are requesting certain information. They cite the section of the Act that they're looking for that information under. And again, this is this information demands section. And then they go on to ask for what I think is some fairly big information if you're a dealer in virtual currency. So they're asking for a comprehensive list of all of the virtual currency addresses that your business has used, both hot wallets and cold wallets, alongside the names of the virtual currency that are offered. They provide a template, and the template in this case is in Microsoft Excel format. And they're asking for that to be returned by a date which is about 2 weeks out in most of these requests that I've seen. They then talk about how a failure to provide this information could result in a penalty. And I think that's fairly important context. One of the other pieces that I haven't highlighted at the very end that is relatively unusual in terms of what we receive from FINTRAC is that it's not from a named individual. And so it's just the money service business team generically, which is the thing that several clients have pointed out to me was quite unusual about these requests. But they were, in point of fact, legitimate requests that were sent by FINTRAC. Now, if you receive a request like this, you do have to answer it. However, there are some caveats that I have here. First and foremost is that if there are potentially issues that you might have in gathering all of that data, if it is an intense volume of data, so in the crypto world, if you're using hierarchical deterministic Bitcoin addresses, and this would result in an Excel spreadsheet with hundreds and thousands of lines, that's probably not what FINTRAC is looking for, and it's okay to reach back out to them and say, hey, this is the case, and we think it would actually be, roughly 565,000 addresses. Is that really what you want, or do you want a shorter period of time, perhaps, rather than going back to time immemorial? And if you do want all of these things, we need a little bit longer to validate it. In this specific case, FINTRAC took the position that they were asking for wallet addresses related to public blockchains, and so wallet addresses themselves don't contain any personal information. But if I'm an exchange, I think I would be not necessarily comfortable saying, here's the list of all of the addresses associated with my exchange. Let me put that in an unencrypted email for you and send it over. From an operational security perspective, there's something about that just rubs me the wrong way. And so for the businesses that requested to be able to send this data through the Canada Post ePost portal and upload it securely, they were able to do that. And that distinction is important. So when you get this type of request from FINTRAC, looking at it, assessing it, letting them know where there might be issues in your context is important. And if you need extra time, if you need accommodations, if you want the request to come via the secure portal rather than by email, those are all things that you could ask for in that situation. And I think that's important to know. The other piece is that if your instinct when you look at it is, I don't think we should have to provide this, I don't understand why we're providing it, that is the exact right time to get legal advice. That is not a roll your own response. If your intent is to do anything other than to reply in the form and format that FINTRAC has asked you for, I cannot stress enough the importance of getting good legal advice and having your counsel be part of that conversation. The next piece that FINTRAC has been sending out is supervisory risk assessment questionnaires. So again, these have tended to be in an Excel format. Sometimes, but not always, we see this as being preceded by a meeting. This is usually just a quick Teams meeting that FINTRAC is having where they say, congratulations, I'm sorry, you've been selected to do this questionnaire. They'll confirm certain information with you verbally about your business, and then that forms part of the questionnaire. So the initial pieces are some generic things about your organization, so that its legal name, its trade names, things like that. And then it gets into some very detailed and specific questions about the business. Unlike the previous information request, where FINTRAC had taken the position that these Bitcoin wallet addresses were public information on a blockchain and didn't need to be under any type of protection, in this case, FINTRAC is sending out these requests via Canada Post e-Post, which is another reason that it may be preceded by a call. So if you don't have a Canada Post e-Post portal set up, if you've never gone through that process of getting a request from FINTRAC, they'll also walk through that with you on the initial call. Some of the elements of this will be pre-populated based on the information from that call, and then there's a majority of information that are actually things that you are going to be filling out. It's a pretty big Excel spreadsheet with information over several tabs, so I haven't included all of the information here, but some of the types of questions that exist are whether or not you have a risk assessment, and does that risk assessment consider all of these elements. And those are just the normal categories that we would expect in our enterprise-wide risk assessment. So what are your products, your services, your delivery channels, all of those categories that are required under the Act. And then they ask you to give the inherent risk that you've assigned to each of those categories. Fascinatingly, in this same section, there's a question about whether or not your organization takes into account Canada's National Inherent Risk Assessment, which Eva talked about earlier this morning. And so I think from that perspective, it's important for the folks in this room to know that this is one of the elements on which you're potentially being assessed by the regulator, and to take that into account and think about how those national risk assessment ratings map to how you've rated your own business. If there's some divergence there, maybe think about how you explain that. So if I'm a multi-service MSB and the national risk assessment says that I'm very high risk, but I'm saying that my business is inherently low risk, I probably have a bit of explaining to do about the differences in those two ratings. And if that's not an exercise that you've gone through as a business, I think that's worthwhile, certainly when the final publication's not out yet. Okay, so when the final publication comes out soon, but not the 2023, not the 2025. Okay, so the 2023 has been published, certainly take a look at that. And when the 2025 version is published shortly, I think there's importance in reconciling those ratings with your own inherent ratings of your business. There are some really interesting issues for these types of questionnaires that I think come up in regards to foreign MSBs, which are not really specified in the materials from FINTRAC. So are you answering these questions in relation to the Canadian segment of your business, so just your Canadian customers, or are you answering this for your business as a whole? And this matters when it comes to little things like revenue, your client distributions, whether or not you've had any reportable, whether or not you've had international EFTs in your EFT volumes, for instance. And my read of the FMSBs that I've seen that have received this to date is that FINTRAC really is looking for the pieces of your business that have a Canadian nexus. So if your base of operations is in Dubai and most of your transactions are across the world and a small sliver of your business relates to Canada, you're really looking for that small sliver of your business in the submission, but you want to preface that for FINTRAC in terms of what you give them. And so I think if it's not necessarily going to be clear to them, you can submit through the Canada Post e-Post portals either additional messaging that you type out or a cover sheet or something like that that would give additional context to your business and to the answers that you've provided. And in this case, what I would say is, hey, our base of operations is in Dubai and we provide services to this list of countries. We've answered with regards to our Canadian business. If you need anything else, let us know. There's also compliance self-attestations, so these overlap pretty significantly with the risk assessment questionnaires. And in these cases, it's a fillable PDF format. They're asking for detailed information about the compliance program. You're attesting, again, this is an attestation, and that will make a little more sense in a second. You're attesting that you have all of these elements. You're answering some specific questions about them. So this isn't just a yes, no. They're asking in certain regards for a fair bit of detail. And in some cases, we're seeing both the attestation and the risk assessment questionnaire being delivered to the same entity at the same time. So you might get one or the other. You might get both. And if you get both, then you're expected to answer the questions in both, even where they overlap. These are just some of the sample questions. So who reviews and approves your internal policies and procedures? Strong hint, that should be your senior officer, and of course your compliance officer. Who developed your employee training? If it was done by a third-party provider, who's the third-party provider? Have you conducted an effectiveness review in the last 2 years? Is the review being conducted internally and externally? And if it's external, they're asking for the name of that auditor. These questions are not unrelated in that if you have the same external party develop your policies and procedures and then act as your external auditor, you have a problem. And because there's the idea that you shouldn't be reviewing your own work, there's not true independence, you shouldn't have the same external party that developed your policies and procedures, then acting as an auditor of those policies and procedures. And that's something that's likely to come up in the context of future examinations and assessments. And they ask if there were any recommendations or action plans made. And I think if the answer to that is no, you probably have some concerns. I've done a lot of audits over the last decade. And I think I had one case in which there was no operational findings, and I made my poor staff retest 200 files because I didn't believe them. So it should be very, very rare. Your auditor should have findings, and those should be helping you to strengthen your compliance program. And at the end of both the self-assessment questionnaire and the attestation, there's this requirement that the person who's completed those documents is attesting to the accuracy of those documents. So that person is saying, yes, I, Amber Scott, am attesting to the accuracy of these documents. So you're having the responsibility for that piece. Any of those activities can lead to exams. And I think that's important to know, because if I'm going through it and saying, I'm just in a hurry, I don't want to answer it, I'm just going to check whatever boxes I think, so no, I don't have a risk assessment, or yes, I think my inherent risk is low all across the board. Surprise. Those are things that can trigger additional assessment activities, including examinations. There is no touch point that you can have with FINTRAC that doesn't have the possibility of triggering an examination. FINTRAC chooses who they'll examine based on market share, based on follow-up. So follow-up means that you've had a previous exam, and probably at the end of the exam, there's 3 possible outcomes. So there's either no action, there is a follow-up action, or there's a notice of violation that's being issued in relation to a penalty. So if there's a follow-up, this is a strong hint that FINTRAC will come back in, they'll re-examine you, and they're interested in knowing how you remediated the findings from your previous examination. Risk score, answering these other questionnaires badly are things that can increase your risk score with FINTRAC. Compliance coverage just means that eventually, on a long enough timeline, everyone has an exam. And themes, which means that if we're seeing things in the media about how certain industries are riskier or there's been particular issues, those industries are more likely to see more exams. The types of exams I don't think have changed significantly, other than that we have more desk exams, so exams that are happening remotely over Teams or over the phone as opposed to in person. And we're having more modular exams, so targeted exams that aren't looking at the full scope of all of your compliance. The process for that, again, this has remained relatively steady over the years. You get a phone call that says you're having an exam. Congratulations. At that point in time, your exam has started. That's followed up with a notification letter, generally through the Canada Post e-post portal, so you're getting that really quick. You don't have to wait to get it in the mail. That should happen on the same day. And that spells out exactly what you need to submit to FINTRAC. And then that's followed up with interviews, generally with your compliance folks. They'll issue a findings report. You then have the opportunity to submit additional materials. And the materials in this context are really about, oh gosh, we should have submitted this to you before, but we didn't, so we forgot a document. Whatever. It's not about the creation of new materials. And if things don't go well, there's a notice of violation, which means that there's a penalty, the ability to appeal to FINTRAC's director, and to appeal to federal court. I think in terms of the most common issues that we see in exams, it's really about not answering the question that's asked. So the first thing that I do to stay organized when I get that notification letter from FINTRAC is I actually take it, I convert it into a Word document, and then I'm taking notes in it and highlighting things as I'm prepping it in that file that gets uploaded to FINTRAC. Missing the mark on Canadian AML, FINTRAC does not care what you do in the UK. They don't care what you do in the United States. They don't care what you do for France. They care that you are following the requirements right here in Canada, and so make sure that you're answering as to what you do in the Canadian context for your Canadian clients to stay in line with Canadian legislation. And then underestimating the data lift. I would say especially for my dear friends in FinTech, there's a lot of times where we think, yeah, it's easy for us to pull the data and it's going to be clean and it's going to be simple and we have great data mapping. And then we don't pull the data until a couple of days before it's due and we have an absolute panic attack because we're now spending a lot of time manually going through that data and cleaning it up and remediating it. FINTRAC can ask for an action plan, but they might not. And Jackie mentioned this morning that where there's a notice of violation, it sounds like we're moving into a context where an action plan is going to become a requirement. But even if it's not a requirement, make an action plan. An action plan just says, this is what the findings were, this is what we did to fix it, and this is the timeline that we're doing that thing on. And have that documented, track your progress towards that. They can ask for it in future examinations. Your auditors are probably going to ask for it. They can ask for it in the context of monitoring meetings. And monitoring meetings, I think, are less likely for smaller MSBs, much more likely for larger MSBs. And here again, I don't think FINTRAC are bad guys in any way, shape, or form. They're lovely human beings. But this is an exercise in evaluation. That is what a monitoring meeting is. So we want to give them a good picture of our compliance. We want to let them know what's happening, how we're tracking to our goals. But I think we always have to remember that we are being evaluated. In terms of just some other quick common threads, make sure you're getting those notifications from FINTRAC. Oh, there we go. I'm out of time. Whitelist those FINTRAC email addresses. I told you this would be a speed run, so I do teach a masterclass in this stuff from time to time, shameless plug. And if there's anything else you need, feel free to reach out. And there are some reference links at the end when the presentations are sent out subsequently.
Thank you so much, Amber. That was a lot of information and a lot of useful. I think Amber would make FINTRAC assessment sound less stressful, if you know what I mean. So thank you so much. This is for you.